Caught my wife cheating with the neighbor, my epic revenge and courtroom victory. At 26, my wife, let's call her M, betrayed me with a so-called friend of mine, G, also 27. To give a bit of context, we first met when I was 22 at a friend's wedding. She was a close friend of the bride, while I was aligned with the groom. Our mutual friends orchestrated our seating arrangements, likely hoping to spark a connection. The moment I saw her, I was stunned by her beauty. As we conversed, it became clear we had much in common. Our connection was instantaneous. We spent the evening dancing and drinking, culminating in a kiss right on the dance floor. Friends caught us in that moment and eagerly questioned the nature of our relationship, but we brushed it off. We didn't exchange numbers that night, yet a week later, she reached out to me, thanks to the bride giving her my contact info. I, of course, agreed to meet her, and from there, a relationship blossomed. It wasn't flawless, but our disagreements were never serious. 2 years into dating, I proposed, and within a year, we were married. After a little over a year of marriage, things began to crumble. In the weeks leading up to our first anniversary, subtle changes in her behavior nagged at me. She guarded her phone more closely, girls' nights became frequent, and our intimacy had all but vanished. I raised my concerns multiple times but was dismissed, told I was succumbing to insecurity. M's indifference deepened the chasm between us, and I began withdrawing emotionally. Gone were the mornings where I kissed her goodbye before work. Our conversations dwindled unless they were necessary. One night, as she slept, I couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion. I took her phone and laptop and scoured through texts and emails but found nothing. Desperate, I turned to her card, and there it was, a second phone. My heart sank as I instantly realized what had been going on. But I needed proof. I combed through the messages on the secret phone, all tied to one number. I connected the phone to my computer and printed every single message and photo, spending the night gathering more evidence and researching divorce attorneys. By the following morning, I had already reached out to a lawyer via email. I still didn't know who the man was until I decided to call the mystery number, pretending to be from a cable company. The name Jay flashed on my screen. It took a moment for everything to click, and when it did, I erupted in anger. M, startled by my outburst, opened the door to my office, but I told her to leave. I remained in that room, consumed by rage, until I couldn't bear it any longer. I called a friend, let's call him T, the groom from the wedding, and asked him to join me for a drink. He must have sensed the tension in my voice because he agreed immediately. When we met at the bar, I downed several shots before T arrived. As soon as he sat down, I confessed that M had been unfaithful. His sympathy was palpable, but when I revealed that J was the one she had been with, he became visibly agitated. After all, he had been the one to introduce us to Jay, apologizing repeatedly. He tried to comfort me, but I asked him to keep it quiet for now. I hadn't yet spoken to M or the lawyer officially. We spent the evening talking, drinking, and trying to make sense of everything. When I got home, M was asleep on the couch, texting and calling me multiple times, worried about where I'd been. I ignored her and went straight to bed. The next morning, she tried to talk to me again, asking why I'd been distant, but I evaded her questions, blaming work stress. That afternoon, I met with the lawyer, handed over all my gathered evidence, and was relieved to learn that our state's laws worked in my favor. M would have little claim to my assets, given her infidelity. Armed with the knowledge that divorce was imminent, I returned home, prepared to confront M. When she didn't answer her phone, I sent a blunt, furious text. As soon as she saw it, she called me, feigning ignorance, but I simply demanded that she come home. When she arrived, I sarcastically remarked on how quickly she made it back, about the same time it would take to get here from Jay's place. She tried to gaslight and insult me, but I remained silent, waiting for the right moment to unveil the mountain of evidence I had gathered. Finally, I slammed the proof down in front of her. She broke down, apologizing, saying she loved me, but her words were hollow to me. I told her coldly that she no longer had any place in my life. I would never touch her again, and as far as I was concerned, the marriage was over. Without another word, I instructed her to pack her belongings and leave my home. As soon as I told her to pack her things and leave, she just stood there crying. I could see the fear and regret in her eyes, but it wasn't enough to move me. She tried to plead with me again, telling me she was sorry, that it was a mistake, that she still loved me. But all I could feel was a numbness that had settled deep in my chest, as if her words bounced off some invisible barrier I had built around myself. Please, she said, her voice cracking. We can work through this. We can fix it. I stared at her, barely able to recognize the woman I once loved, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with. I wasn't sure if it was anger or sheer exhaustion that stopped me from yelling, but I calmly said, "You've already destroyed it. There's nothing left to fix." She hesitated, looking around the house as if she were searching for some piece of familiarity, something to anchor herself to. Then slowly, she turned and started packing. I watched her move around the bedroom, throwing clothes into a bag with shaking hands. For a moment, a flicker of sympathy tried to creep in, but I quickly snuffed it out. I reminded myself that she made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. While she packed, I left the room and sat down in the living room, staring at nothing. My mind wandered back to the early days of our relationship, how everything seemed so perfect, how I thought she was the one. But now, those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, someone naive, someone who thought love was enough to protect against betrayal. After what felt like an eternity, Em walked out of the bedroom with her bag slung over her shoulder. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but I didn't say anything. She stopped in front of me as if waiting for some final word, some sign that I might change my mind. But I didn't. "Where will you go?" I asked, not really caring about the answer but knowing I had to say something. "I'll stay with a friend. For now," she mumbled. I nodded, then stood up and opened the front door. "Goodbye, Em." She walked past me without another word, stepping out into the cool night air. As soon as she was gone, I closed the door and locked it, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The house felt different, quieter, emptier, yet somehow more peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the weight of uncertainty hanging over me. The decision had been made, but the relief was fleeting. The reality of the situation started to settle in, and I realized that the life I had planned, the future I had envisioned, was gone. The house, which we had filled with laughter and memories, now felt like a shell, a place where trust had been broken and love had withered. I poured myself a drink and sat back down, trying to process everything. It would take time to heal, I knew that, but at least now, I was in control. The lawyer would handle the divorce, and soon, I'd be free of the weight of this betrayal. Over the next few days, Em tried to contact me several times, texts, calls, even showing up at the house once, but I didn't engage. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and let him handle it. The divorce papers were served, and Em had no choice but to accept it. The guilt was clear in every message she sent, but it was too late for apologies. As word spread among our friends, the reactions were mixed. Some, like T, were supportive and rallied around me, offering help and a listening ear. Others were shocked and didn't know how to react. J, predictably, disappeared from my life. I never confronted him directly. In my mind, he wasn't worth the effort. He had betrayed me, and that was all I needed to know. The weeks that followed were tough, as I worked through the emotions that came with the end of my marriage. Anger, sadness, and sometimes regret would hit me in waves, but I knew I had made the right decision. My life with them was over, and I had to start thinking about the future, about rebuilding my life without her. It wasn't easy, but each day got a little better. I threw myself into work, spent more time with friends, and slowly began to reclaim a sense of normalcy. The wounds were still there, but they were healing. I was moving forward, even if it felt like I was doing so with a limp. One day, as I was clearing out the last of Em's belongings from the house, I came across a photo of us from our wedding day. We were smiling, looking so happy, so in love. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for what we had lost, but I quickly put the photo away. That chapter of my life was closed, and it was time to focus on writing a new one. And had made her choices, and now I was free to make mine. As time passed, I settled into a routine. The nights weren't as lonely as they had been in the beginning, though there were still moments when the silence of the house would weigh on me. Every now and then, I catch myself thinking about Em, not with anger anymore, but with a dull ache, the kind that comes from remembering something that's been lost forever. I suppose that was progress. The divorce moved forward quickly. My lawyer kept me updated on the proceedings, and true to his word, the evidence I gathered ensured that Em wouldn't be able to contest much. I could tell she didn't have the fight left in her anymore. When we finally met face-to-face during the settlement negotiations, she looked tired, broken even. Part of me wanted to feel some sort of satisfaction, but all I could feel was the emptiness that had replaced what we once had. She barely spoke during the meeting. Her lawyer did most of the talking, and I sat there, emotionless, listening to the final details of how we would split our assets. There wasn't much left to discuss. We had no kids, no shared businesses, and the house, thankfully, was mine before we even got married. In the end, it felt more like a formality than anything else. The end of our marriage had happened long before those papers were signed. After the meeting, I walked out of the office and stood outside for a moment, taking in the fresh air. It felt strange, this sense of finality, of everything being officially over. I thought back to the day I proposed to Mem, the joy on her face, the excitement we both felt about building a future together. It was hard to reconcile that memory with the reality of what had happened. T called me later that evening to check in. He had been a solid friend throughout the whole ordeal, always offering to hang out or grab a drink whenever I needed it. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice warm and concerned. "I'm okay, I guess," I replied, sipping a beer. "It's just weird. It's all over now, but it doesn't feel like the relief I thought it would." T sighed on the other end. "That's normal, man. You lost something, even if it was broken. It's still going to hurt for a while." "I know," I said quietly. "I just keep wondering if I could have done something differently. If I missed some kind of sign." "You can't think like that," T said firmly. "She made her choices. This isn't on you." He was right, of course, but that didn't stop the self-doubt from creeping in every now and then. After we hung up, I spent the evening in my office thinking. I had done everything I could to be a good husband, to build a life with them, but I had to accept that some things just weren't meant to last. People change, feelings fade, and sometimes no matter how much you try to hold on to something, it slips through your fingers. A few more weeks passed, and the paperwork was finalized. I was officially divorced. It was strange to think that the woman I had once vowed to spend my life with was now just someone from my past. We hadn't spoken since the meeting with the lawyers, and I didn't expect we ever would again. I had no interest in keeping any kind of connection with her. Too much had been broken. One evening, I was packing up the last remnants of our shared life. There were still a few things of hers left in the house, but I had decided to donate them. I didn't want to keep any reminders of her around. As I was sorting through an old box, I found a small note tucked between some papers. It was from Em, written during the early days of our relationship. I unfolded it, and her handwriting brought a strange sense of nostalgia. It was a simple note, telling me how much she loved me and how excited she was for our future. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a wave of emotions I hadn't expected. There was no anger anymore, just sadness. We had been so full of hope, so sure that we were meant to be together forever. But life had a way of turning even the best laid plans upside down. I folded the note and placed it back in the box. Some things weren't meant to be thrown away, even if they came from a part of my life that was over. In the months that followed, I started to rebuild myself. I began focusing more on my career, pouring energy into projects I had neglected during the turbulence of my personal life. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, and meeting new people. I wasn't rushing into anything romantic, though. I needed time to heal, to figure out who I was again outside of my relationship with them. Titi and his wife remained supportive, and they invited me to dinners or group outings whenever they could. At first, I hesitated, feeling awkward being the single guy in a sea of couples, but eventually, I got used to it. I even started to enjoy it. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. I was at a party T had dragged me to, some work event of his. I didn't expect much from it, just a night of socializing and pretending everything was fine. But as I stood near the bar, nursing a drink, a woman approached me. She introduced herself. Let's call her Elle. She was smart, funny, and easy to talk to. We spent most of the evening chatting, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me. Something I hadn't felt since before everything went wrong with them. We exchanged numbers at the end of the night, and though I was cautious, I couldn't deny the excitement that came with the possibility of something new. Maybe, just maybe, I was ready to start thinking about the future again. It wouldn't be easy, and the scars of my past wouldn't fade overnight. But as I left the party that night, I felt a small glimmer of hope, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. Life was moving forward, and so was I. In the weeks after meeting Elle, I found myself thinking about her more often than I expected. We had texted a few times since the party, casual conversations about work, movies, and random things that happened during the day. Nothing too deep or serious, but it felt refreshing, like a breath of fresh air after being trapped in a suffocating space for too long. One evening, Elle asked if I wanted to grab dinner. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I was ready to dive back into dating, but something inside me told me to go for it. I agreed, and we made plans to meet at a quiet restaurant downtown. The night of our dinner, I felt more nervous than I had in a long time. It wasn't the same kind of nervousness I had when I first met Em. This was different. This was about opening myself up again, letting someone in after everything I had been through. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew I had to at least try. When I arrived at the restaurant, Elle was already there, waiting at the bar. She greeted me with a warm smile, and instantly, I felt some of the tension in my chest ease. We found a table, ordered our drinks, and the conversation flowed easily, just like it had the first night we met. She had a way of making me feel comfortable, like I didn't have to try too hard or pretend to be something I wasn't. As the night went on, I opened up a little more about my past. I didn't go into too much detail, but I mentioned that I had recently gone through a divorce. Elle didn't push for more information, just nodded sympathetically and told me she understood. There was no pity in her eyes, just genuine kindness. It was exactly what I needed. After dinner, we walked around the city for a while, talking and laughing about everything and nothing at all. It was simple, easy, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about M or the pain of the past or the betrayal I had gone through. I was just in the moment, enjoying the company of someone new. At the end of the night, we said our goodbyes, and she gave me a soft, lingering hug. It wasn't rushed or forced, just natural. As we pulled away, she smiled and said, "I had a really great time tonight." "Me too," I replied, meaning it. After that night, we began seeing each other more often. There was no pressure, no rush to define what we were or where things were going. We were just enjoying each other's company, and that was enough for now. I wasn't looking for a serious relationship at the moment, and thankfully, all seemed to understand that. She respected the space I needed to heal and find myself again. But slowly, over time, I could feel something shifting. I started to look forward to our dates, to the texts and calls that brightened my days. She became a source of light in the middle of a dark chapter in my life. And as much as I had tried to guard myself, I realized that I was beginning to let her in. The more time I spent with Elle, the more I saw what a healthy, balanced relationship could look like. She was thoughtful and kind, but also independent, with her own life and passions. There was no manipulation, no secrets, just honesty and respect. It was a stark contrast to the last months of my marriage with them, and I found myself feeling hopeful again, hopeful that I could have something real, something better. Of course, there were moments when doubt crept in. I still had scars from what happened with M, and there were days when I wondered if I was capable of trusting someone again. Elle never pressured me, though. She gave me the time and space I needed, and because of that, I started to feel safe with her. One afternoon, a few months into seeing each other, we were sitting in a park after grabbing lunch. The sun was shining, and we were just enjoying the quiet together. Out of nowhere, Elle turned to me and asked, "Do you think you'll ever be ready to be in a serious relationship again?" I thought about it for a moment, not wanting to give a rushed or empty answer. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm starting to think that maybe I could, with the right person." She smiled softly at my response, not pushing for more, just letting the conversation sit there. It was one of the things I appreciated most about her, her ability to let things unfold naturally, without forcing anything. As the months went by, I continued to heal. I wouldn't say that the pain from my past had completely disappeared, but it had faded into the background, no longer the dominant force in my life. I could think about M without anger or bitterness. In fact, I had even come to terms with the fact that what happened, painful as it was, had led me to where I was now. Elle and I eventually had the conversation about what we were and where we wanted to go. It wasn't dramatic or drawn out, just a simple, honest discussion about how we both felt. We decided to take things slow, but there was an unspoken understanding that this was turning into something real, something meaningful. Looking back, I realized how far I had come since that night when I found out about M's betrayal. At the time, I thought my world was ending, but now I could see that it was just a painful chapter in a much longer story, a story that was still being written. As I sat with Elle, watching the sunset over the park, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the lessons I had learned, for the strength I had found, and for the possibility of love and happiness that lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. As time went on, Elle and I grew closer. The slow, cautious steps we'd been taking eventually turned into something more steady and intentional. We weren't just casually seeing each other anymore. We were building something real. It felt different from anything I had experienced before, and for the first time since my marriage ended, I allowed myself to truly embrace it. There were still moments of doubt, of course. Late at night, when everything was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I'd sometimes wonder if I was setting myself up for another heartbreak. The scars from M's betrayal were still there, not as fresh, but they hadn't disappeared completely. Trusting again didn't come easily, but Elle's patience and kindness made it possible. One evening, Elle and I were sitting in my living room, talking about everything and nothing. The TV was on in the background, but neither of us was really paying attention. We were just wrapped up in conversation, laughing about something ridiculous that had happened earlier in the week. Then, out of nowhere, she asked me, "Do you ever regret what happened with them?" Not the cheating part, obviously, but the relationship itself? Her question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about it in that way before. I sat back and considered it for a moment. "I don't know," I said honestly. There were good times, especially in the beginning. But after everything that happened, it's hard to separate the good from the bad. Sometimes I wonder if we were just delaying the inevitable. Elle nodded, understanding without judgment. "I get that," she said softly. "But do you think you learned anything from it?" I paused. It was something I hadn't fully processed yet, but I knew the answer deep down. I think I learned a lot, mostly about myself. I know now what I won't tolerate, what I need in a relationship, and how important communication is. I guess it made me stronger in a weird way. She smiled and took my hand. "You are strong," she said gently. "And you deserve to be happy. You know that, right?" I looked into her eyes and felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. There was something so genuine in the way she said it, as if she truly believed it. And for the first time, I started to believe it too. "I'm trying," I admitted. "It's been a long road, but I'm getting there." Elle squeezed my hand, and we sat there in silence for a while, just enjoying each other's presence. It was moments like this that reminded me how far I had come since the darkest days of my marriage's collapse. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first met Em. I had grown, learned, and changed, and maybe that was the whole point. As my relationship with Elle deepened, I began to realize that I didn't have to carry the weight of my past with me forever. What had happened with Em would always be a part of my story, but it didn't have to define me or my future. Elle wasn't Em, and I wasn't the same person who had once been blindsided by betrayal. One weekend, Elle and I took a short trip to a nearby town. It was something simple, a chance to escape the routine of everyday life and just enjoy each other's company. We wandered through small shops, explored local cafes, and spent the evenings by a cozy fireplace in the cabin we had rented. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd been craving. On the last night of the trip, we sat outside under the stars, the cool breeze wrapping around us. I leaned her head on my shoulder, and we just sat in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling of a nearby fire the only sound. "I'm happy," I said quietly, almost as if I were testing the words out. Elle lifted her head and smiled at me. "I'm glad," she said softly. "You deserve it." As I looked at her, I realized how true those words were. After everything I had been through, after all the pain and betrayal, I had finally found someone who valued me, who respected me, and who wanted to build something real with me. I wasn't trying to fill a void or replace what I had lost with them. She was simply herself, and that was enough. The trip ended, and we returned to our usual routine, but something had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Elle and I were making plans for the future, but there was no rush. We both knew that healing was a process, and we were willing to take our time. Eventually, I reached a point where I could look back on my relationship with Em without bitterness or regret. Yes, it had ended in betrayal, and yes, it had hurt like hell, but it had also taught me so much about who I was and what I wanted out of life. I no longer felt defined by the pain of my past. Instead, I felt empowered by it, stronger because of it. One evening, Elle and I were sitting on my porch, watching the sunset, and I realized that I hadn't thought about Mem in weeks. The grip she once had on my mind had loosened, and all I could feel was a sense of closure. I had moved on, not just physically but emotionally, and I was ready to fully embrace whatever the future held. As the sky darkened, Elle turned to me with a soft smile. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice gentle. I smiled back at her and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past finally lift from my shoulders. "I'm thinking," I said, "that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it.